Here's a great photo of George Hainsworth with his son, Bill. After only 3 games into the 1936-37 season, the Toronto Maple Leafs gave their veteran goaltender the opportunity to spend much more quality time with his family by cutting him from the team. Hainsworth was an NHL legend, but he was also now 41 years old and had played more than 500 games. And while replacing older players with younger ones wasn't exactly revolutionary, it should be noted that Conn Smythe had a keen eye for hockey talent, particularly promising juniors that either needed some extra grooming, like Joe Primo, or an immediate opportunity, like Turk Broda. Turk's real name was Walter, and they say that as a kid he had so many freckles on his face that he resembled a turkey egg, and he ended up with the nickname Turk. I've even read one account that says that his mom gave him the name. The stellar young goalie was stuck in Detroit's farm system, third in line for the Wings' top job, behind John Ross Roach, who, you might remember, the Leafs dumped years earlier for Lawrence Chabot, who they replaced with George Hainsworth, who they had just now dropped to acquire the 23-year-old Broda. Smythe knew of the Detroit situation, and he knew that he needed a long-term netminder, so he purchased Turk and brought him to Toronto, where the goalie forged a Hall of Fame career over 14 seasons. Another sign of the change that was occurring on the team focused on Bill Toms, who was coming off an all-star year and being touted as the next Charlie Conacher. No pressure. Toms did beat Conacher in scoring that season, but it should be noted that Charlie only played 15 games due to injury. But Toms wasn't the Leafs' lead scorer. He was fifth in that department. Top spot went to one of the newcomers, Sil Apps. Along with purchasing Broda's contract, securing the rights to Apps was another Smythe masterstroke for ensuring the next generation of Leafs heroes and legends. Sil Apps gave the Leafs a hint of the kind of player they had just signed by winning the first ever Calder Trophy for the NHL Rookie of the Year in 1936-37. In 2017, the NHL named him as one of the league's 100 greatest players of all time. Kind of makes you feel sorry for the other new faces on the team that season, like Bill Kendall, Toronto-born Jimmy Fowler, George Parsons, also from Toronto, and Gordie Drillin, though only Fowler, Parsons, and Drillin were rookies. Gord Drillin finished third in regular season team scoring and led them in the playoffs, as well as finishing second in Calder voting to Apps, so really don't feel bad for him at all. The one player everybody did feel sorry for was King Clancy, who had started the year, his 16th NHL season, but by 6 games in, it was all over for the 33-year-old. By all accounts, Smythe's decision to let the declining Clancy go was emotionally wrenching for both men. King was, after all, the player that Conn openly coveted to ensure a championship and who valued at $50,000 at a time when the average Canadian made little more than $300 a year. King Clancy's playing days were finished, and he ended his career as the league's top scoring defenseman. He would go on to be an NHL coach and referee, as well as a Leafs executive, and mainstay at the Gardens up until the day he died in 1986. In 1987, the league awarded the first King Clancy Memorial Trophy for the player who best exemplifies leadership qualities on and off the ice and who has made a significant humanitarian contribution to his community. Because Francis Michael Clancy wasn't just a wildcat and human express. He was also a good fellow. After the departure of such a spark plug player, it would be up to individuals like Kelly to give the team its pep. And that's the last time I'll use that joke. One thing that remained constant throughout the Leafs personnel changes was the media attention. Here's a Toronto newspaper from January the 2nd, 1937, with wide reporting on the blue and white, including a chronological breakdown of Charlie Conacher's health issues to date. Blood poisoning, kidney removal, broken left wrist, 3 broken bones in his right hand, a broken collarbone, boils, a broken left hand, smashed right shoulder, and a broken right hand. This kind of coverage is routine by today's standards, but serves the same purpose. because sports offers a valuable escape during tough economic times. And you could say that the Leafs suffered their own depression around then, as the 1936-37 season was a bit of a low point. Joe Primo had unexpectedly retired even before the year began. They lost Hainsworth and Clancy early. It would be the last year in Toronto for Hap Day. The team barely played above 500 in the regular season, and they were swept in the first round of the playoffs. So it's not surprising that Conn Smythe needed to unwind a little at some point. On January the 19th, 1937, the Leafs were in Boston for a game. Smythe dressed up in a morning suit and made an evening appearance in the Bruins' home rink to win a bet. Here's Conn getting a chuckle out of Hap Day before puck drop. It's unclear who Conn's wager was with or how much it was for. However, it seems safe to say that it wasn't enough to purchase another King Clancy. 1 month later, in February, Toronto was in New York playing against the Americans. You can see a young Silaps here wearing number 16, not the number 10 he later became famous for. The very next day, another behind-the-scenes newspaper article appeared. This one portrayed Red Horner in the role of a loving family man instead of the usual on-ice tough guy persona. About a month after this, the Leafs' 1936-37 season came to an end on March 25th with that playoff sweep by the Rangers. Before the 1937-38 NHL campaign got underway, Toronto played a charity exhibition game in London, Ontario. The names on the split squad rosters hint at the transformations taking place on the club. Drillin was replacing Conacher as both team and NHL top scorer. Apps was on his way to assuming the leadership that had been Hap Day's, who was no longer a Leaf, much less captain. And Conacher wore the C that year, but only played 19 games due to injuries and would eventually leave the club. Those preseason teams had some old familiar faces, Buzz Bowl, Red Horner, Busher Jackson. But gone were Frank Finnegan, Art Jackson, Bill Kendall, and Jack Schill. The departure of Art Jackson meant that the media's once-hyped Kitty line was officially no more. Even though Turk Broda was a really good goalie, he couldn't play both nets at the same time. His exhibition opponent was Toronto-born Phil Stein, who played a total of 1 NHL game during the Second World War. But he was around at the right place at the right time to get a collectible card made of himself. The Leafs auditioned 4 rookies in 1937-38, 3 of whom stuck. Murray Armstrong, Murph Chamberlain, and Rudolph Bingo Campman. It proved to be a bounce-back season for the Blue and White. They returned to the top of NHL team scoring and won their division. Another highlight was the appearance of Conn Smythe on his first and only bubblegum card. Along with outlining his hockey resume, the card says Smythe is, quote, noted for his color and humor, perhaps in reference to his crazy wacky stunts like wearing a morning suit in the evening. Oh, Connie, you wild man. With Joe Primo retired and enjoying a successful off-ice career as both business and family man, Charlie Conacher and Busher Jackson were now all that remained from the once feared kid line. Conacher, who had led the NHL in goals 5 times and points twice, had seen his production hobbled by injuries and was on his last legs as a Leaf. He was gone at season's end. Jackson was another story. A local boy, he learned to skate on the same Grenadier pond mentioned in episode 1 before Frank Selke signed him to a contract as a teenager. And if any one player on those 1930s Toronto Maple Leaf clubs lived the rock star lifestyle, it was Jackson. By all accounts, Busher never met a social engagement or event he didn't like. He led the league in scoring in 31-32, but by 1938, his hard partying had caught up with him. Though still productive enough because of his foot speed, his numbers were down and Conn Smythe was not particularly amused. Regardless of his color and humor, Smythe was a really old-school kind of guy. He had fought in the First World War and was straight-laced and clean living. He prided himself on his sobriety and toughness and molded the Leafs in his image. Remember, This is the man famous for the motto, if you can't beat him in the alley, you can't beat him on the ice. Sil Apps didn't smoke or drink, and Busher Jackson's carousing did not make Con happy. Apparently, the only person Smythe cut any moral slack for was team trainer Tim Daly. People at the time said they couldn't understand why, but perhaps the fact that Daly was also a veteran of the Great War had something to do with it. Even though Turk Broda couldn't stop this shot or keep his team from losing this February 1938 game against the Rangers, Smythe could, at least, be pleased with his club's overall performance. As mentioned, they were back to being the NHL's top scoring team and back into the postseason. Right winger Gordie Drillin led the Leafs offense that year, as well as being the league's top goal scorer and point getter, while also winning the Lady Byng Trophy. Here's Drillin at the end of March, after his overtime goal clinched Toronto's semi-final sweep of Boston, sending them on to the finals against Chicago, where they lost to the Blackhawks. So, another strong regular season followed by another unsuccessful trip to the Stanley Cup Finals. It may have almost felt like things were getting back to normal for the Maple Leafs, except that Clancy and Day and Bailey and Primo and Conacher and all those other names that forged those legendary Toronto clubs at the beginning of the 1930s were now gone. It was a time of great upheaval. And in the final episode of our series, you'll see how Conn Smythe responded by soldiering on, quite literally.